Good afternoon, everyone. Live from Silicon Valley, California. And this is Success Sadhana. My name is JM, and I welcome you all to our program today, where we continue our series, Lessons from the Golden Monk, our topic today is we are humans are sponges. What are we absorbing? With our speaker, Vaish, from Bhakti Yogi, author, and former monk. We have 24 members on Zoom and around 30 members on Facebook. Good afternoon, Vaish. Welcome back to another episode of Success Sadhana.
Thank you very much, Jay. I'm really glad to be back here in this room. It's been sustaining us all the way from the very beginning of the pandemic, if we can think back that far. Hey, Mark, good to see you again. Nathan, thanks for joining. Victor, Francis, Manu's here. Rajesh, Radhakripa, Prabhu, Mala's here. Other Mark. Hey, Mark, good to see you. Ram's here, Gopinath, S.Y., Laura's here. Hey, Kathleen, Rebecca, thanks for joining. Debbie, Sri Krishna, Murti, Shashank, Manish, Mayank, Naveen. Thank you very much. And everyone else who joins the room in a few minutes, welcome to everybody. We're continuing with some of the teachings of who I'm calling the Golden Monk, was historically called Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who taught about Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga has been around for a long time. In fact, it's in some of the oldest literatures in the world describing the yoga process. Yoga comes from a root word in Sanskrit, yuj, which means to connect. And we're already connected, but there's a way in which we get distracted from our actual connection and start identifying ourselves with matter. And the process of yoga is meant to reorient ourselves to ourselves. Who are we? Where are we? If you look at a map in a mall and you can't find the little spot that says you are here, it's annoying to say the least. So Bhakti starts with getting a clear idea of who we are, where we are, and so forth. And the teachings of yoga are varied, but they're considered to be a ladder through which we can climb up to our highest potential in life. Yes, JM, please go ahead.
No, nothing.
Nothing. Okay. I'm losing my intuitive powers, dude. I always feel like I can tell when you're about to say something important. And so Bhakti Yoga is very natural for humans because it has a lot to do with gratitude and love and feeling. But it is a practice, actually, and it is yoga. And we're connecting with our original conscious source. We're conscious and our source is conscious, is one of the premises of the teachings of Bhakti, that we're not dead stones. We are an energy that's above matter. Above in the sense that there are different grades of energy that we can observe and we can catalog and we can grade. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about the ways in which there are various energies, and he names what he calls the Bhinna Prakriti, or the lower energies, which are earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. And above these, he said, is the conscious being. So please take a second to notice that you're a conscious being. Can you notice that? Somebody once told me, you're not a human doing, you're a human being. So what about that being part? I identify a lot with doing. Well, how did you do, or what are you doing, is a more conscious, is a more regular question that we get. People don't say, how are you being? Of course, that would be slightly awkward English, but the idea is we exist. Who is it that's conscious of the body, of the outside world? Matter wouldn't matter unless we were looking at it. And we project ourselves into the things of this world, and we change them from just things to my things. So the process of yoga gets us in touch with what's most important. Science studies matter, and the wisdom literatures study what matters. There's a difference. There's a difference between matter and ourselves. So there are observations and lessons that the Golden Monk gave us 500 years ago that were expanded upon by his students, who were brilliant scholars in the first place, and then they retired from their active employment. Some of them were prime ministers and so forth. There's 6 in particular called the 6 Goswamis, and they lived in a small town called Vrindavan in India 500 years ago, and they wrote extensively. So the teachings that or the lessons that I'm passing down come from first Chaitanya, the Golden Monk, and through his students, who then wrote extensively and codified his teachings and made them very practical. And I got them from my teacher, who's a descendant in the line that comes down from generationally from these teachers called the 6 Goswamis. And so today's topic is something that the Golden Monk emphasized. If you're in a particular situation in your life and you wonder how you got there, he had a plausible answer, which was because of your association. And this comes right from the wisdom literature Bhagavad Gita, in which Krishna, teaching his student Arjuna, says, Purusha prakriti stohi bhunte prakriti jangunan karanam guna sangosya sarasad yoni janmasu. I know that was Sanskrit, but I'm going to break it down. He said, sarasad, whatever good or bad situations you find yourself in, there is a karanam, or a cause for that. Good to know, right? Good to know how we get what we get or don't get. And he said the karanam, or the cause for our various situations in life, sto means like where we're standing. It's cognate with the word stand in English. Where you're standing now, you got here because of something. There's a cause. And here it is. Are you ready? Drum roll, please, Charles. He says, thank you. He said you got through your sangha. Sangha means your associations. What are you associated with? Whom you associate? What kind of environments are you exposing yourself to? So we're going to explore those today. But before we do, just as a centering exercise, we'll try a little mantra meditation together, if you're up for it. And there are no hard and fast rules for mantra meditation. You can do it anywhere at any time. You can keep it going even as you're working in between tasks, walking from one office to the next. You can keep the mantra going on your lips or even in your mind, and you'll find it to be uplifting. And also, you can start your day with a little mantra meditation just by taking some time to listen to the mantra. Oftentimes, sitting helps. If you sit in a nice atmosphere where you're not going to be distracted and you can say it. And I always find this Zoom room to be quite calming. Because nobody can get at us because we're busy right now. So we can do whatever we want, right? So let's try doing this mantra meditation. I'm going to switch over to original sound. And then I'm going to turn on a tampura, which is a drone instrument, to create a little environment so that we can say a mantra together. And we'll do it 10 times. I'll say it and then you can follow along. It's going to be the mantra Nitai Gauranga. And here comes your drone. So I'll say it along with my breath, and hopefully our breath cycles sync up. But if you wish to break off on your own and say it at your own speed, or to not say it and just listen, feel free also. Nitai Gauranga Nitai Gauranga Nitai Gauranga. 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 And now just notice how the vibration has entered into your mind, into your body. And you can rub your hands together, come back to external awareness, and back into the room. Man means mind. Tra means to deliver, to lift us up. So the mind can be a bit of a maelstrom. It's constantly moving. It's like a little factory. Combinations and permutations of things we've seen or touched before that we combine and then say, oh, maybe one of these, maybe one of those, constantly chasing it. The mantra pulls us above that whirlpool for some time so we can experience a sense of our own consciousness and the source of our consciousness. And the more you practice that and just become aware of the mantra and experience the vibration, the more you'll taste the fruits of the mantra. So now back to the topic. And it's not unrelated to our practice of mantra meditation. And we'll start with the very first slide. How do you like the tempura? In fact, behind me now, I have an electronic tempura. It's always playing quietly, but it's very calming. So today's program and every week's program on Friday at 12 is called Success Sadhana. And sadhana means that you're pursuing a goal. You're going somewhere. You have something specific you want to do. It's not wandering. You're not meandering, but you have a clear idea of a sadhya or a goal. So sadhana is a practice to get to any goal. And humans can do that. We can decide to go in a different direction. We can decide on a cherished goal, and no matter how far away it looks, if we find the right practice and we apply it, that's where we have to use our free will. And we have to be a little fearless and say that I can improve myself even if it's one tiny molecule at a time. And of course, success has to do in this context with rising above just the ordinary conception that I am this body, but actually coming into awareness that I'm something more than that. I'm a conscious being. So today's topic is about Sangha. And we humans are sponges. We're a lot more porous than we might think. I mean, just observe your own body. It's a bunch of holes, like pores on your holes, porous. Literally, we have openings everywhere. And our senses are very deliberate openings through which we take in various aspects of the outside world, the phenomena of this world. It's actually uncanny. I barely ever think of it, right? About how the senses work, but they're working all the time nonetheless. So we'll go to the first slide. We're exposed to the environment. Every one of us has an environment, and we're also open to suggestion. This is the nature of the human mind, and actually it's our nature as conscious beings. When somebody suggests something, we consider it. Or even if we don't consider it, the idea might stick in our mind and it might influence us. Have you ever flip-flopped on anything or changed your mind? Have you ever seen anybody have one opinion and then change their mind and have another opinion? Yeah, it happens all the time because that's our nature. So we can, if the golden monk said, be aware of this. He told us that our nature is marginal. We can go any direction at any time. Don't take for granted that there's a status quo, because it'll change. According to your sangha, your association, it'll change. So if you have a sadhana, you have a practice, he said, the first and foremost aspect of your sadhana or your practice to get to the goal in yoga is to deliberately choose your environment, or to upgrade your environment, and also to realize that you're open to suggestion. Let's see the next slide. Kind of like that picture. This one's good too. I mean, when I first looked at the picture, I didn't notice that there were a lot of equations back there. Kind of looks like the inside of somebody's mind. But there's a way in which the sponge is pulling in all those calculations. We do that all the time, all day long. Senses are open. And at night, when we're sleeping, there's a churning of those various impressions, not just from the day, but also from this lifetime. And the wisdom literature say it's not just this lifetime. We bring with us our minds. Mind is subtle energy. It's kind of like software. So nobody really worries that much if their smartphone hardware breaks, because no, I backed it up. It's no big deal. It's all out there. It's all absorbed somewhere in a cloud. So our minds are like that too. Even when this hardware that I'm sitting in right now disintegrates, and it will, it's got a shelf life for sure. And then we take with us the subtle body, which is like the software, and it gets accommodated in the next body. So what are we soaking in is a question we can ask ourselves, because that's determining where we stand. We're standing somewhere now because of our past associations and what we've soaked in. Let's see the next slide. So the Golden Monk talked about two main influencers in our lives. Now, of course, there's a profession of being an influencer, but everyone's, whether they consider themselves professional or not, everyone's an influencer, and everyone has an influence on our lives. So other humans, of course, there are other entities as well, but humans, we have an affinity for, since we're humans. And there are varieties of humans, and they all have various ways of thinking about themselves and about the world, various ideologies, isn't it? If you ask people, that they may, even within a single party or under the umbrella of a particular group, they may all have differing ideas, a spectrum of ideas, even within a group that's solidified under one ideal. And then we have our environment, which is depicted down below, just sort of abstractly, that there are certain environments that we move in, no? I found this definition of environment from the etymological dictionary that I liked. The aggregate of the conditions in which a person or thing lives. The aggregate. So you add up everything at the end of the day, week, month, year, lifetime, and say, what kind of conditions did you live in throughout your lifetime? That's your environment, the aggregate of the conditions in which a person or thing lives. Now, fortunately, and I keep saying this because I like being a human, we as humans can change our conditions. We can all change the people, the persons that we associate with. Yeah, that's okay. Let's go to the next one. So first, we talked about humans. There are many aspects to humans. We're complex entities, but there are two that are specifically or very important, or ways that we can find a fulcrum of a way to move, or a way to identify how we're being affected by association, by Sangha. One is the attitudes that people have, and the other is their habits. Attitudes and habits. So humans have these two. If you analyze people and say, what is this person's attitude? And let me just give you a definition of attitude, because it's really interesting in my opinion. Attitude. Attitude comes from late Latin, aptitudo, from aptus, fit, from Italian, which means fitness or posture. And the definition given in the dictionary that I have on my screen right now of attitude, a settled way of thinking or feeling about someone or something, typically one that is reflected in a person's behavior. A settled way of thinking or feeling about someone or something, typically one that is reflected in a person's behavior. So people have that. Every human has a settled way of thinking or feeling about someone or something, and it is reflected in their behavior. And then, of course, we have habits, and we can notice ourselves that we're habituated to moving in certain ways, to eating certain types of things, to listening in certain ways. So this is good to note because it has to do with what we're soaking in as humans. We soak in attitudes that other people have. We also start to soak in their habits by association. We'll do one more slide before some discussion will break out, because already Linda posted something. We can start with that, and then everyone can start pouring in ideas to the chat box, and also speaking up live and just churning these thoughts. But the environment, we have sounds, we have visuals. And I gave a definition earlier of our environment. It's an aggregate of the situations that we're in. And so the Golden Monk said these are very important in Sangha. Of course, the people we're around, they gravitate towards certain kinds of sounds. See if you agree with that. I'm making statements. If you can identify with that, or let's say resonate with that, it's a better word to use for sounds, resonate with that idea. Every person has their own soundscape in their life. And when we come around them, we'll hear those kinds of sounds that they make through speaking, or the kinds of sounds that they listen to. You can identify people. Sometimes various cultures resonate towards certain types of sounds because that's what they grew up in. That's what resonates with them. And same thing with the things we see, we take in through our eyes. Our environment then affects us. We soak it in, the environment. It goes into us, and it becomes part of the aggregate that comprises our overall conscious state, which is something that Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad Gita as being extremely important. So this is one of the ways the Golden Monk, and there's more teachings here to continue after this, but I thought if we come back into the Zoom room and let's just see what Linda said as a jumping off point. And then we'll also take some reflections or questions. Jim, can you put us back in the Zoom room? There we are. Wow, we got one from Linda and from Mark also. Are you up for reading these, JM?
Yes.
Okay.
So Linda says, if I do meditation before bedtime, I have sweet dreams. But if I watch the news before bedtime, I always have sad or scary dreams.
There you have an anecdotal evidence of how this works. That, we expose ourselves to various environments and people. Somebody's talking to us through the TV set. Do we resonate with that person's values and with their motive in speaking it? And also, what are they saying? Is it important? Is it outside our circle of influence? Anything we can do about it, or is it just agitating our mind? So the way Linda, goes into that very important realm of sleep is more deliberate, carefully. Okay, that's nice. Let's hear what Mark has to say.
Mark is inquiring what's the verse, chapter, number of the verse in which Krishna teaches Arjuna that we got here because of association and nothing else. I ask because assuming that Krishna is right, non-doership is proven because of association were created in the previous moment, and we got there too because of association obtained prior to that moment, all the way back to birth. I have never seen a proof of non-doership, but Krishna's observation leads to it.
Okay, well, the verse is 1322. The chapter is called Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness, and Purusha is the first word, Purusha Prakritistohi. And so in the verse 1322, Krishna refers to us as Purusha. We're actually people. We're entities. We're not nothing, and we're not matter either. Purusha Prakriti sto means standing, where we have a standing. Prakriti Jangunan. Purusha Prakriti stohi bhunkte Prakriti Jangunan. We enjoy amongst them in the world in certain ways, and we're in a certain situation. Karna means cause. Guna means the modes, the modalities of nature. Guna sango, and that's the word, sangha, because of the way we associate with them. Sarasad means good and bad. Sarasad yoni janmasu, and he said, actually, yoni means like a womb. So good and bad is born out of this womb of association. So that's there. And then a non-doership is interesting. I'll just make a quick comment on it because it's really important. The Bhagavad Gita ultimately, although it makes statements about the ways in which we're subjected to various forces of the universe, ultimately, even in the verse I quoted today, Krishna's saying, Purusha, you're actually a person, you're a doer, you're not a stone. And therefore, you have responsibility for where you end up. It's not that we're only destined by our past association, but there's a way in which we have a choice. Otherwise, why are we even having this meeting today and discussing it? It's so that we can develop what's called vivek. Vivek means discrimination. We have an intelligence, it's a tool. And when we discuss, as we're discussing today, that there's causality and we have something to do with it. We don't have everything to do with it, but we have something to do with it. And that is the execution of our free will. And if we hear that here's where you are now and here's where you can get to by amending the ways you're acting and the ways you're associating, I can choose. And I can say, I'm going to go in a different direction. That means we're not completely bound by fate. And therefore we are agents. Agents means we can actually change the direction we're going, albeit in a minute way, but it makes a big difference. Okay, what else, JM?
Ash is asking, and even beyond individual birth, right? Our karma goes all the way back beyond our current birth death cycle, is how I understand it, anyways.
Yes. This is the verdict of the wisdom literatures like Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutras, Srimad Bhagavatam, and they say that, well, I'll give you an exact quotation. It's from the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna talks about how when we leave this present body, the aggregate, using that word again, of all the experiences we have adds up to a dominant attraction that we have in our life, a dominant way of feeling. And it's our own consciousness that creates the next situation that we're moving into. We're very powerful and creative. And death is just a juncture. It's just a transfer point between one hardware to the next. And the reason we're accommodated for the next hardware is because of the force of our own consciousness. And the way it's described, and that was from Bhagavad Gita, the way it's described by Patanjali Muni of antiquity in the Yoga Sutras is that, okay, here's an example that illustrates the way he teaches. He says, if you walk on wet sand or wet cement, and you then look behind you, let's say you're barefooted and it's wet sand, you look behind you and you'll see the imprint of your own foot. And then if someone were to fill that in with some plaster of Paris, you'd get a perfect impression of your foot with all the lines on it, all the little impressions, everything. So then what Patanjali Muni says is our present body came from the filling in of the aggregate of desires we had in our last life. It leaves, and it's a strong impression. And then the material nature just accommodates it, fills it in, and then we get another body and another situation, another duration of life to work with in the next life until we actually break the cycle called samsara and we come out of the material world and into the non-material environment.
We have Rashi who is asking, Hare Krishna Maharaj, sometimes just for the fear of being left behind in this fast-moving society, we refrain from following these practices like not using social media will cut us off from the world. Any word of wisdom, please?
Sure. Be more deliberate. Like back when there was television, remember those days? Anybody? TV? There used to be television. So back when there was television, one piece of advice I heard that somebody gave that I think was very helpful was before you turn on the television, which can drag you away from your life for indefinite amounts of time, be very deliberate. In fact, get a TV guide. Do they still have that? Probably not. When I was growing up, there was a little book you could buy or subscribe to. It was called TV Guide. It was a book actually, and it would tell you what shows were on. And so what the person said was, go through and underline why are you turning it on? And same thing with social media. Before you get caught in an endless loop on whatever it is, Instagram, TikTok, or any of these things, decide, why am I going on here and what am I going to look at? And if you decide ahead of time, you'll be more fortified from just being pulled into the beast and then lost and influenced by various kinds of images, sounds. You get association through that too. Just the way people talk, the attitudes they have, the habits they have, that goes in, it becomes part of the aggregate. Do you want that? If you don't, then choose something higher. And I'm going to go into that in a minute, higher choices. Was that from Facebook?
No, it was from chat, from Rashi here.
Okay, from the chat. Okay.
We have Wolf who's asking, why is it that since the golden monk, nobody had the access to the same source in the last 500 years, please?
Well, the premise isn't completely accurate, Wolf, because people did have access to it. One reason for a while that it wasn't available is the same reason that a lot of things aren't available is they're lost in time. There's a way that when people pass on a teaching, that it can become corrupted over time. And another reason was that the books that contain some of these teachings, they were written by hand, actually. And the way that it got passed down was not as prolific as it is now. And nonetheless, there's always been what's called a disciplic succession. There's been a line of teachers that you can trace back that go all the way back to that time 500 years ago, that has been passed down from one teacher to student over many, many generations and is still intact today. And the literature is much more available today because a lot of it's written in Sanskrit and it's been translated, and a lot of it's been translated from Bengali and so forth. And these teachings are now readily available. Now, whether somebody has time to read them in this day and age, that's another point. And we have to make time, to enter into it in order to take advantage of it, actually. Jan, more?
Yes, there are a few more. Vicky is asking, as sponges, we can often end up feeling too heavy. How can we work with the fact that we are constantly, sorry, just a second. How can we work with the fact that we are constantly absorbing while also keeping it light?
Well, there's two ways that help me. One way is to review my priorities, because when we develop this, as I said, discrimination, vivek, is a kind of power of your intelligence. It's refining your intelligence to be very deliberate in life. And it helps me to take time to decide what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And it's easy to go through a day, a week, a month, a year, 10 years, 20 years, a lifetime without asking this question, just being moved along by circumstances. But if I decide I'm going to keep these things and let other things going, that's what prioritizing means in essence. It helps to lighten my load because I don't have to carry everything. I can decide to drop certain activities that I'm doing and say, I'm just not doing that anymore. I can also decide categories of thought that I'm not going to carry with me. For instance, as Stephen Covey points out in his book, 7 Habits, he says that there's our circle of influence and our circle of concern. Our circle of concern can expand unlimitedly. And if we get involved in that unlimited expanse of concerns, I'll just be overwhelmed and I'll feel very heavy. But if I narrow it down deliberately and I say, what can I actually do something about? The smaller the circle gets there, the more accurate it actually is, because we can really only do something about ourselves. Even in relationships, I said this the other day, I think, I'll take care of me for you and you take care of you for me. And, when we get down to that level of granularity in our priorities, deciding what's most important, we feel much lighter because we know where we're going, and we don't feel obligated to take on other things because I've already decided this is what I'm going to do. And these are the few things that are going to get the result I'm looking for. And there's always those few things. And that helps to make me lighter. And I have to do it regularly because the human experience is one of absorbing everything. And it all just comes in. So we have to start over every day and decide, what's this day for? It's a compartmentalized unit that we can do something with each day. Is that okay, Vicky?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for the great question.
We have Charles who is asking, Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hey, Charles. Good to see you.
Can you expand on how samsara is broken and what follows? Thank you.
Sure. Samsara means something that flows naturally. The Sanskrit term means one thing flows into another. It's a cycle. People get in habit cycles, and this birth and death is a locked cycle until we no longer need a material body. A material body is meant to experience the phenomenal world. But we actually are spiritual beings, and there is a spiritual realm that is the source of all the variety here in this world, because this world's a reflection of the original world, the spiritual world. Even Plato opined in the same way without probably the the assistance of the wisdom literatures. And so when we engage our senses for a higher purpose, then we break for the spiritual purpose, we connect to our original source. And we engage the senses not just for sense gratification. Of course, we have to have, we have to take care of ourselves. But our main purpose and the aggregate of our desires is towards doing a spiritual service called devotional service. Then we get accommodated with a spiritual body. We're directing ourselves. So when we amend the way we're thinking, feeling, and willing through this process of yoga called bhakti yoga, and then there's a sense in which we don't really need a material body. It can't really help us. Therefore, we break out of samsara and we get a spiritual body. There it is.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. I'm not sure if I'm quite understanding the concept of having a spiritual body. Maybe that's for a different time, but I just wanted to put that out there. I'm not quite understanding that piece.
Well, actually, a material body is, sometimes we think, oh, spirit means something wispy or insubstantial or amorphous, whereas matter, that's the real thing. I'm not saying you do, I'm just saying that is frequently the concept, but actually it's the other way around in the wisdom literatures. They say consciousness, better than saying spirit, because it's a little bit nondescript, but consciousness, that's what we are, conscious beings. It's a different energy than the material world, which I've said many times, because it's in the wisdom literatures. And so what's actually substantial about us is us. We're not our bodies. As soon as you leave your body, then the body will immediately start to break down. The reason it's sustained right now is because you're in it. The reason we're looking at you now and seeing the symptom of consciousness, which is your countenance, which is noticeable, your effulgence, which is there. When we step out of this body, that body becomes inert matter only, and it starts to fall apart. So we're substantial, and the material body isn't. So just as we have a body now that's, a body because it's got parts to it, we also have actually a real body, which is, it has spiritual senses and it has shape and form and qualities, but it's substantial. It's not this wispy kind of energy that is here today, gone tomorrow. Hopefully that took it down, like maybe three yards down the field on first down or something like that.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
Okay, TBC on that. Jam, anything else?
Mark is asking another question. I used to watch Jerry Springer to practice detachment, to not get drawn into the brawl. So even exposure to social media can be used to strengthen us, as long as we go in there consciously with the intention to stay conscious, right?
Yeah, good point, Mark. As usual, this idea that the idea isn't to withdraw from the world, as we've mentioned in previous talks, but it's to have enlightened engagement with the world. We can't give up things, but we can utilize them for a higher purpose. Of course, we can give up some things, but we can't be divorced from our bodies, nor can we be divorced from our emotions, because we're sentient beings and we have bodies that we have to maintain. So what can we do? There's the path of renunciation, which is a fallacy. There's the path of attachment, which is also described as a fallacy. Attachment to matter. I'm attached to things that are temporary. That's not going to work out well. And I try to renounce them then, because I say, okay, I'll just walk away from it. You can walk away, but you'll go back, because you're by nature attached. So the path of bhakti is the path of dedication. It means using whatever you have now, whatever resources, whatever environments you're in, to elevate you. And we've talked about the sage who lived in the wilderness, and he met the king Yadu. And Yadu said, "How did you reach this enlightenment that you're in?" And the sage pointed around and said, "I have all these teachers here." And Yadu said, "I don't see anybody." And then the sage started pointing to the aspects of nature that have taught him the lessons that he imbibed. And there's a way in which, as Mark points out, you may see something and then relate it to, yeah, okay, here's a brawl. What started the brawl? and what's going on in this situation? And you may relate it to a spiritual principle. I try to do that myself as I'm walking around, and I catalog these things and write them down because, for instance, one day when I was walking past the storm drains in my town here in Burlingame, and I noticed that every one of them has a placard on it that says "No dumping drains to bay," and has a picture of a fish. And then I was thinking, yeah, anything you put in here in the suburbs, it goes downstream into the bay. And similarly, I started thinking our ears are just like those storm drains. You should have a little tattoo up here that says "No dumping drains to the bay of the heart." So whatever we put in here, it ends up in here. And if I ever get a tattoo, which is not likely, that's what it would be right here. Okay,
Yeah,
there's a few more slides, JM,
Sure.
or whatever else you were just going to say.
No, we can take, we have one slide, so we can cover that.
Okay. Yeah, social media doesn't have to be a beast, but it's certain things are kind of designed in a way to draw us in. There's AI, which predicts the kinds of things that or it doesn't predict. It does predict the kind of things we're going to be attracted to. It's insidious, actually, so we have to be careful. Humans are higher energy than wire and glass and things like that, but if we create an implement through which we start getting things, we can actually be controlled by it, because it's still, in another sense, it's energy that comes from our source, which is more powerful than we are in its aggregate. Here's a few adjustments that I make in order to realign myself, so I'm soaking up the right things. And I always feel immediate good effects from these. So one is to deliberately seek association of sadhus. So a sadhu is a noble-minded, knowledgeable soul, somebody who's really got integrity. I was talking to such a person, actually a few people like that this morning, and just the conversation, I have notes to prove it, that they're knowledgeable souls, realized, knowledgeable, and high-minded, noble-minded. And if I deliberately seek out the association of sadhus, so that's the meaning of a sadhu, is somebody who has a practice. They're trying to go for the goal. So deliberately means just don't leave it a chance. Don't do it randomly, but really search out those people that have these qualities, because by such association, I naturally come to a higher level myself. And the second is change conversations you're having with your friends and family. If you're obligated to have conversations, see if you can be an architect of raising the conversation. There's a little tool I learned a long time ago, how to, without anybody noticing, change gears and take the conversation to a higher level. It's to use these three phrases together. I know how you feel. I felt that way too. Here's what I've found. So first you empathize, and then you bring it to the next level. I know how you feel. That's how I felt. Here's what I found. And you can try to change the conversation, which is something that changes the environment. And you can see, even in a conversation with a significant other, it can become mundane after a while, just about planning or this or that, but then you can say, okay, let's change the conversation without offending anybody. You can sort of innocuously bring up a higher topic, and notice right away how that starts to change your consciousness, and you evolve upward. Okay, JM, let's see. Oh, and next is upgrade your environment. So this makes a big difference. We have some control over our environment, even if you're living in a simple place. If you take time, and it's worth it, says the wisdom literatures, to be clean. Cleanliness is one of the symptoms of sattva, or the higher mode of nature through which you get light. So spiritual practice doesn't mean to be a slob or just let everything fall apart because it doesn't matter anyway. It's just the opposite. Everything organized. And the mantra for that is place for everything and everything in its place. And if you don't need it, then recycle it, pass it along, get it out of your environment so it's not vexing you by calling to you every time you look at it and thinking, oh, maybe I'll use that broken typewriter sometime. Nobody has typewriters anymore. So clean, take time to clean, everything clean. That upgrades the environment no matter where you are. Next is transcendental sound vibration. If you introduce transcendental sound vibration into your environment you can do it yourself by chanting mantra, or there are spiritual literatures that you can read out loud, or you can get them recorded and listen to them. I have several devices so that I can always stay in the vibration wherever I go, whether it's a car, a different room, moving around. And the kind of community center that we developed down here in Silicon Valley, when we first remodeled the whole thing, I made sure that there's so many wires in the walls there, because it goes to every part of every room in the house, even into the restrooms, so you don't miss anything. And that's like indicative of how you can upgrade your environment, is by making sure you have some transcendental sound vibration coming in. And I already mentioned organized, because that's part of sattva gun also. So practical tips to get started. Make a list of those in whom you see the qualities you like to imbibe. This is part of being deliberate about it, because you're going to, whatever the persons you look at and you say, okay, this is who I'm associating with, you can be sure, due to the power of sangha or association, you're going to absorb their qualities. Do you want those? Okay, if you want to change them, be deliberate about the people you're going to associate with. And next is practically so obvious that we can miss it, but is choose the best books and read deeply, because authors give themselves to us through their writings. So don't read things that you don't want to go in. But books are a really powerful way. It's an abstraction of speech, writing, and all you have to do is transfer it into your own mind and body. It's a really good alternative to social media, television, or whatever there may be, that becomes random or just entertainment, and the mind becomes mushy and the ideas become random. But if you decide, these are the books I'm going to read this year, this quarter, this month, it really keeps you in this really powerful way of feeding your brain. And the third is to write out a plan to incrementally improve your environment. So clean, organized, and infused with transcendental sound. So you have to have a plan. Write it down. Make sure that it's clear that here's what I'm going to do. Here are the steps I'm going to take. Here are the tools I need to make sure that it happens. And you'll see, as per the teachings of the Golden Monk, that you'll elevate your own consciousness, because we're sponges, but because we're humans, we can develop vivek, or discrimination about what we listen to and whom we associate with. Om Tat Sat, which means the end. Let's see if you have any last reflections or questions before we sign off.
Yeah, if you want to ask a question, you can unmute, or I do
Yeah,
have
that
few
was a
other.
little abrupt. I just pulled that on you at the last second. It's hard to ask questions sometimes, but you can light up the,
Yeah,
oh,
there are
Mona Lisa.
quite a few on chat. One is there from Facebook as well. Amit Chaudhary is asking, how do I strike the balance between being open-minded and discerning?
Yeah, that's balance is always a point of a matter of repositioning. Every day I go out and do balancing exercises. I walk along the thin rim of a bocce ball court. I try to make it all the way across. And I notice that I'm like, you have to reposition it with every step. Even if it's subtle, the better I get at it, the more subtle it is. But I'm pulling back to the center. So yeah, we have these two parts of our lives, the way we're maintaining ourselves and the way we have to interact with others, just out of social etiquette and so forth. And we also have our spiritual practice. If you jerk to one side or the other too hard, you'll fall off the beam. So you have to try to accommodate both things, which requires being a little open-minded and not fanatical. Fanatics generally, it's like it has to be this way, can't be any other way. But in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna warns against fanaticism. He says, don't be overly dependent on the ordinary course of activities. Try to be inventive to stay in your practice. It's lifetime wisdom, to live a life amidst so many different kinds of circumstances that are unavoidable and still stay in your practice. And that's maturity, and it takes practice. It takes practice to balance too. Okay, Jam.
Mona Lisa has a question. Transcendental sound vibration. Would that be similar to have a desktop fountain?
Well, I have an outside fountain, and it certainly doesn't hurt to have that. Very specifically, I would say the categories of transcendental sound vibration, which are most effective, although that kind of sound vibration is what's called sattva. It's a peaceful vibration. It purifies the mind. It helps to be balanced. And more than that, we've talked a little bit about mantra, but there are sound vibrations that are passed down like seeds. I was eating a fig this morning from our own tree, and I was looking, I was like, wow, there's thousands of seeds in one fig. They're tiny little things, but when you plant them, they grow into another fig tree. So mantras are like that. They're seemingly ordinary combinations of syllables, but actually they are packages of kind of spiritual DNA that come to us. And when we implant them in our minds or put them into our environment, then it sprouts into something that is especially useful to us. So mantra is a kind of transcendental sound vibration. So the mantra we started with, and there are other mantras that we've introduced here, but we can give you those mantras. And also, I listen to things like Bhagavad Gita. You can get a recording, and you can listen to it, as you're moving around. And there's also music. It's called kirtan. Kirtan means a really beautiful melodic singing of the mantra. And we've done that here before, but a long time ago. We can do it again sometime. I'll sing you a song next time. And that kind of thing, listening in the environment, is transcendental sound vibration, according to the Golden Monk. Thank you for such great questions and participation, and for listening so attentively, everyone from various places in the world. And speaking of various places in the world, I had seen the Himalayas from the airplane so many times flying into Delhi, especially on a clear day. And I had the opportunity actually going up there, and I found a phenomena that takes place up there amongst the yogis who live in caves. And they spend their time chanting mantras, meditating, going beyond the body. But they do come out and they look for fruits and roots. And while they're outside of their caves, they notice other yogis, and they'll see them at a distance on the high peaks of the Himalayas. And so to encourage one another, they raise their hands high in the air, and they have this phrase that they call out, and it echoes across the canyons. The phrase is Hari Bol, which means keep the transcendental vibration going. So since we're into bhakti yoga and we're in little cave-like rooms here on the Zoom, maybe we can try it before we leave. What do you think? Hari Bol!
Haribo.
Bol!
Haribol!
Hari Bol!
Haribol!
Thanks,
Haribol!
everybody. Thanks, JM. Good to see you all.
Thank you.